The suitcase was already in her hand when he finally spoke. For 3 long years, he had watched her laugh with other people, cry where no one could see, and slowly stop believing she belonged anywhere. Yet he had never found the courage to tell her what his heart had known since the first snowfall she survived on his ranch. Now she was walking away. The afternoon wind pushed dust across the yard as Clara Morgan climbed onto the wagon she had traded almost everything to buy. Every possession she owned fit inside one weathered trunk. 1 horse. 1 quilt. A few dresses carefully folded. Her mother's silver cross tucked inside her pocket. That was all life had left her. The ranch behind her was quieter than she'd ever heard it. Even the horses seemed to understand something was ending. She wrapped trembling fingers around the reins. "I suppose this is goodbye." No one answered. She almost smiled. It felt right somehow. Goodbyes had always been lonely. 3 years earlier she'd arrived with torn boots and hungry eyes after losing both parents to a fever that swept through the valley. Her uncle had promised work at Hollow Creek Ranch, but he disappeared before she arrived, leaving only unpaid debts and strangers who owed her nothing. Everyone had turned her away. Everyone except one man. Luke Dawson had stood outside his barn, broad-shouldered beneath a worn leather coat, studying the exhausted young woman who could barely stay on her feet. "I don't need another ranch hand." She'd lowered her head. "I understand. But my horses need someone patient." She looked up. "They're kinder than most people." That had been the closest thing to kindness she'd heard in weeks. Luke never asked questions. He gave her a room above the stable, honest work, and enough food to put color back into her cheeks. He never made promises. Never crossed a line. Never treated her like charity. Over time she learned his silence wasn't coldness. It was armor. The townsfolk respected Luke but rarely understood him. They whispered that losing his younger brother in a range war had changed him forever. He smiled less. Trusted fewer people. Loved no one. At least, that's what everyone believed. Including Clara. The seasons passed. She learned every horse by name. Luke showed her how to calm frightened colts with nothing but patience. "You can't force trust," he'd tell her. "You earn it." Sometimes she'd catch him watching her from across the fields. Every time their eyes met, he'd look away first. She wondered why. One evening after supper they repaired a broken fence beneath a sky glowing orange. "You've become part of this place," Luke said quietly. She laughed. "I'm just the stable girl." "No." He hammered another post into the ground. "You're the reason the horses don't fear strangers anymore." His words warmed her more than the fire waiting back at the house. Still. He never said anything more. Months became years. People assumed they'd eventually marry. Even Clara secretly hoped. But hope slowly became embarrassment. If he truly cared, wouldn't he say something? Instead he kept his feelings buried beneath chores, responsibility, and silence. Then everything changed when Ethan Blake returned. Ethan had once been the richest rancher's son in the county before gambling away nearly everything. Charming, handsome, impossible to ignore. He greeted Clara with flowers. Real flowers. Not wild ones. Store-bought roses brought all the way from Silver Ridge. "I remembered your favorite color." She frowned. "You don't know my favorite color." He grinned. "I was hoping it was red." She laughed despite herself. Luke watched from the porch. His jaw tightened. But he said nothing. Weeks later Ethan began visiting almost daily. He complimented her cooking. Helped repair wagons. Brought books from town because he remembered she'd once mentioned missing stories. Luke noticed every gift. Every smile. Every moment Clara seemed happier. Still. Silence. One night old Mrs. Whitmore, the cook, cornered Luke in the kitchen. "That girl won't wait forever." He kept washing dishes. "I'm aware." "Then tell her." His hands stopped moving. "I can't." Mrs. Whitmore sighed. "Can't or won't?" He never answered. Clara overheard only pieces of that conversation. Enough to know they were talking about someone. She prayed it was her. Days passed. Nothing changed. Then Ethan proposed. Not with fireworks. Not with grand speeches. Just a quiet afternoon beside the river. "I know you don't love me yet," he admitted. "But I promise I'll spend the rest of my life giving you reasons to." It wasn't the proposal she'd dreamed about. But it was still more than Luke had ever offered. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. Instead she walked back toward the ranch hoping. Begging. That Luke would finally stop hiding. She found him repairing a saddle. "Ethan asked me to marry him." His hands froze. A long silence settled between them. Finally. "Congratulations." One word. One knife through her heart. She nodded. "Thank you." That night she cried until sunrise. A week later she declined Ethan's proposal. Not because she loved Luke. Because she couldn't marry one man while hoping another might someday look at her differently. Summer ended. Autumn arrived. Then came the letter. A wealthy family in Montana needed someone experienced with horses. Double the wages. A small cottage included. A chance to begin again. Clara accepted. She packed without telling anyone until the morning she planned to leave. Mrs. Whitmore hugged her so tightly they both cried. The ranch hands shook her hand. Even the horses seemed restless. Only Luke remained inside the barn. She waited. 1 minute. 5. 10. Finally she climbed onto the wagon. "I guess he doesn't even want to say goodbye." The wheels creaked forward. Behind her, barn doors burst open. Luke ran into the dust. For the first time in 3 years. He was running after her. Luke caught the wagon just before it reached the old wooden bridge. He was breathing hard, one hand gripping the side rail as Clara pulled the horse to a stop. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. She searched his face, hoping to find an answer that had been missing for years. Instead, she found fear. Real fear. "I thought," he began, struggling for words. "I thought I'd already lost you." Clara swallowed. "You never had me." The word struck harder than any fist. Luke lowered his eyes. "No," he whispered. "I suppose I didn't." She waited. Every heartbeat felt like another chance slipping away. He opened his mouth. Closed it again. "I'm sorry." She almost laughed. 3 years. 3 years of silence. And now. "I'm sorry. I know it isn't enough." "No, Luke." Tears filled her eyes. "It isn't." The wind carried dust between them. She wanted him to stop her. She wanted him to finally say everything she dreamed about hearing. Instead he stood there, fighting himself. "I hope Montana is kind to you." That was all. Clara nodded slowly. "So do I." She clicked the reins. The wagon rolled across the bridge. Luke never moved. He watched until she disappeared beyond the cottonwoods. Only then did he realize something that terrified him. Silence had protected him for years. Now it had cost him the only woman he'd ever loved. The ranch felt empty before sunset. The horses kept turning toward the road as if expecting Clara to return with buckets of grain and her cheerful voice. Mrs. Whitmore found Luke sitting alone outside the stable. "You let her go." I know. You fool. He didn't argue. Because she was right. I buried one brother, he said quietly. I promised myself I'd never love anyone enough to lose them again. Mrs. Whitmore sat beside him. And what did that promise earn you? Luke stared across the fields. Exactly what I feared. She rested a gentle hand on his shoulder. No. He looked at her. It earned you something even worse. Days passed. Every chore reminded him of Clara. Her gloves still hung beside the stable door. One of her favorite books remained on the windowsill. Even the old gray mare refused anyone except Luke, searching every morning for the woman who always brushed her mane. The ranch hands noticed the change. Luke barely slept. He barely ate. One afternoon young Ben, the newest ranch hand, finally asked, "Boss, are you sick?" Luke shook his head. "No. You look worse than sick. I miss someone." Ben smiled sadly. "Then go after her. If she doesn't want me?" Ben shrugged. "Then at least she'll know." Those words stayed with Luke all night. At sunrise he saddled Thunder, the fastest horse on the ranch. Mrs. Whitmore stepped onto the porch holding a small bundle. "You forgot these." It was Clara's quilt. She must have left it behind in her hurry. Luke stared at it. He remembered winter nights when she'd wrapped herself in it while reading beside the fire. He tied it behind his saddle. "I'm bringing her home." Mrs. Whitmore smiled through tears. "No." Luke frowned. "I'm asking if she'll come home." Meanwhile, Clara's journey north was far lonelier than she'd imagined. She stopped at small towns where no one knew her name. She slept beside campfires. She avoided conversations. The farther she traveled, the more she questioned herself. Had she waited long enough? Should she have stayed? Should she have forced Luke to tell the truth? "No," she whispered one cold evening. "If he loved me, he would have said something." She repeated those words every night until they almost became believable. 3 days into her journey, she reached a trading post crowded with travelers. A little girl tugged on Clara's sleeve. "Miss?" Clara smiled. "Yes? Are you running away?" The innocent question caught her off guard. "I suppose I am." "From who?" She looked toward the southern horizon. "Maybe, from someone who never chased me." The girl's mother called her away. But the words lingered. Someone who never chased me. If only she knew. Miles behind her. Luke was riding harder than he ever had. Every traveler he met received the same question. "Have you seen a young woman with chestnut hair driving a gray wagon?" Some shook their heads. Others pointed north. Each answer gave him hope. Then came the storm. Rain turned the trails into rivers of mud. Thunder rolled across the mountains. Even Thunder struggled to keep his footing. Luke refused to stop. Not this time. Not again. Because every mile he waited was another mile she disappeared from his life forever. At sunset he found abandoned wagon tracks leading into a narrow canyon. His heart began pounding. She was close. Very close. Then he saw something that made his blood run cold. The wagon had overturned. Luke leaped from Thunder before the horse had fully stopped. The wagon lay on its side against a boulder. One wheel had snapped clean off. A blanket was caught beneath the axle. Boxes and clothes were scattered across the muddy ground. "Clara." His voice echoed through the canyon. No answer. He searched frantically. Fresh footprints. Another set beside them. Larger. His stomach tightened. Someone else had been here. Then he heard a weak voice. "Luke?" He turned. Clara was sitting beneath a cottonwood tree, clutching her ankle. Relief nearly brought him to his knees. He rushed toward her. "You're alive." She blinked in surprise. "What are you doing here?" "I came after you." She stared at him. "You came?" "I should have done it years ago." For a moment neither spoke. Rain dripped from the branches. "I thought you'd never leave the ranch. I thought you'd never forgive me." She looked away. "I'm trying." Luke carefully examined her ankle. "It's sprained." "I figured. You can't travel." "I don't really have a choice." "You do now." She met his eyes. "I don't understand." Luke reached behind his saddle and untied the folded quilt. "You left this." She smiled despite herself. "I wondered where it went. I couldn't let you lose one more thing." Her smile faded. "I've already lost enough." "So have I." The honesty in his voice made her pause. He had never sounded so vulnerable. Never. Night fell quickly. The storm made traveling impossible. They built a fire beneath an overhanging cliff. For the first time in years, they were completely alone. No ranch hands. No chores. No excuses. Only silence. The kind that demanded truth. Clara stared into the flames. "Do you know what hurt the most?" Luke listened. "It wasn't that you never kissed me." She took a slow breath. "It wasn't even that you never asked me to stay." A tear slid down her cheek. "It was watching you care about me every single day, while pretending you didn't." Luke closed his eyes. "Because she was right. I was afraid." "Of me?" "No." He looked directly at her. "Of loving someone enough to lose them." She whispered. "So you chose to lose me before you ever had the chance." The words shattered him. He had no defense. No explanation. Only regret. He moved closer to the fire. "There was something I wanted to tell you the day Ethan proposed." She waited. "But I convinced myself you'd be happier with someone who knew how to speak." A sad laugh escaped Clara. "You idiot. I know. You truly believed I wanted flowers from Ethan?" "I saw how you smiled." "I smiled because I hoped you'd get jealous." Luke stared. "I was." "Then why didn't you say anything?" "I didn't think I deserved you." Clara shook her head. "You never even gave me the chance to decide." The fire crackled between them. For the first time, every wall Luke Dawson had spent years building had completely fallen. And before the sun rose, he knew there was only one thing left to say. The 5 words that had lived inside his heart for 3 long years. But whether they would heal what his silence had broken, neither of them yet knew. The fire had burned down to glowing coals by the time Luke finally found the courage he had spent 3 years hiding from. Clara sat wrapped in her quilt, watching the flames dance in the darkness. She didn't rush him anymore. She was too tired to chase words that had never come. Luke stared into the fire. "I've rehearsed this 1,000 times." She gave a sad smile. "Then why does it still seem so difficult?" "Because once I say it, there's no hiding again. You've hidden long enough." He nodded. The wind carried the scent of rain through the canyon. Luke took one slow breath. Then he looked directly into her eyes. "Please, don't leave me." 5 words. Nothing grand. Nothing poetic. Just the truth. For a heartbeat, the entire world seemed to stop. Clara blinked. She had imagined speeches. Declarations. Promises. Instead, the strongest man she had ever known looked completely broken. Not because he feared rejection. Because he finally understood what losing her truly meant. Tears rolled down her face before she realized she was crying. You should have said that years ago. I know. I begged God every night to hear those words. I know. I almost stopped loving you. Luke's voice cracked. But you didn't. No. She laughed through her tears. That was the problem. He moved closer but stopped an arm's length away. I can't promise I'll never be afraid again. She listened. I can't promise I'll always know the right thing to say. Another step. But I promise I'll never let fear make my decisions again. He reached into his coat. Clara expected a ring. Instead he pulled out a folded piece of paper. I wrote this 2 years ago. She unfolded it. It wasn't a letter. It was a deed. Half of Hollow Creek Ranch. Her eyes widened. You were going to. I wanted you to own half of everything. She looked at him in disbelief. Then why didn't you tell me? I kept waiting for the perfect day. And there never was one. No. He smiled sadly. I wasted every perfect day we already had. Clara folded the paper carefully. I don't want half your ranch. Luke's face fell. I want the man who built it. His eyes filled with tears. She stood slowly despite the pain in her ankle. I've spent 3 years wondering whether I imagined what I saw every time you looked at me. You never imagined it. I needed to hear you say it. Luke stepped forward. I love you, Clara. The words came so naturally now that he wondered why he'd feared them for so long. I've loved you since the morning you tried to feed an angry stallion with an apple because you thought he looked lonely. She laughed. He bit me. I know. You laughed. I fell in love with you before you finished yelling at me. She covered her face, laughing and crying at once. You impossible man. I'm late. Very. But I'm here. She reached for his hand. So am I. He gently pulled her into his arms. Neither of them kissed right away. They simply held each other. Because after years of silence, being together was enough. The first rays of sunrise spilled over the canyon walls. For the first time in years, neither of them felt alone. But the journey home had only just begun. The trip back to Hollow Creek Ranch took 4 days. Clara couldn't ride because of her ankle, so Luke walked beside the wagon nearly the entire way. Whenever she protested, he smiled. I've got years of catching up to do. She laughed. You know, most men use flowers. I tried silence. That was a terrible choice. The worst. Every evening they talked. Really talked. About childhood dreams. About fears neither had admitted. About the family they had each lost. About the future they had both been too frightened to imagine. Luke discovered Clara still kept the tiny wooden horse he had carved for her first Christmas at the ranch. She confessed she had nearly thrown it away the morning she left. I couldn't. Why? Because even when I was angry. She smiled softly. It still reminded me of home. Luke quietly took her hand. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never wonder where home is again. When they finally rode through the gates of Hollow Creek Ranch, every ranch hand stopped working. Mrs. Whitmore stepped onto the porch, shielding her eyes from the afternoon sun. The moment she saw Clara sitting beside Luke, she burst into tears. I knew you'd find her. Luke laughed. Barely. Mrs. Whitmore hugged Clara so tightly she almost lost her balance. You scared this old woman half to death. I'm sorry. Mrs. Whitmore glanced at Luke. No, he's the one who owes everyone an apology. Luke raised both hands. I've been told. More laughter spread across the yard than the ranch had heard in years. Even old Ben whispered to another ranch hand. I've never seen the boss smile this much. Neither had anyone else. The weeks that followed felt different. The house no longer echoed with silence. Breakfast became long conversations. Evening rides became their favorite habit. Sometimes they said nothing at all. The difference was that silence no longer meant fear. It meant peace. One autumn afternoon Luke led Clara to the hill overlooking the entire valley. The cottonwoods had turned gold. The river reflected the setting sun like polished glass. "This is where my father asked my mother to marry him," Luke said. Clara looked around. "It's beautiful." He knelt on one knee. This time there was no hesitation. No waiting for another season. No fear of tomorrow. Only certainty. "I've already lost enough years." He opened a small velvet box. Inside rested a simple gold ring. "Clara Morgan." He smiled through tears. "Will you spend the rest of your life reminding me to say what's in my heart?" She laughed so hard she started crying again. "I will. Anne." She slipped the ring onto her finger before he could finish. "Before you overthink it." He stood and kissed her beneath the wide western sky. Months later, the little church in town overflowed with neighbors, ranch hands, and friends. Ethan Blake came too. He shook Luke's hand with an honest smile. "You finally learned to talk." Luke grinned. "I'm still learning." Ethan turned to Clara. He'd better spend the rest of his life making up for those 3 years. Clara smiled. "Oh, he already has." Years passed. The ranch grew. Children's laughter replaced lonely evenings. Travelers often stopped at Hollow Creek Ranch, where they were always offered a warm meal and a place to rest. When anyone asked why Luke Dawson never let strangers leave hungry, Clara would smile. Because someone once opened a door for a girl who had nowhere left to go. And whenever young couples came to them asking the secret to a lasting marriage, Luke never spoke about hard work, money, or luck. He simply looked at Clara, still with the same love in his eyes, and answered. "Never make the person you love guess how you feel." Clara would squeeze his hand, remembering the day she had climbed onto a wagon believing her story with him was over. She had been ready to leave forever. Then he had finally said 5 simple words. "Please, don't leave me." Those 5 words hadn't erased the years they had lost. They had given them the courage to make every year that followed worth living together.